The church was overflowing with over 300 guests. Every pew packed with family, friends, and colleagues who had come to celebrate what was supposed to be the happiest day of my son's life. The air smelled of fresh roses. The music from the string quartet echoed softly against the high ceiling, and all eyes were fixed on the altar. That was when I pushed open the side doors and stepped inside. My name is Nadine Fletcher. I am 67 years old, and I am not the kind of woman who enjoys making a scene. Yet that afternoon, there I was, walking into my son's wedding with my chin lifted and my pearls glinting under the dim golden lights. Jessica Miller, the woman standing at the front of the aisle in her white designer gown, froze when she saw me. Her hands trembled around her bouquet. Her smile faltered as she whispered loud enough for the first row to hear, "What are you doing here? You were not invited. You are not supposed to be here." I touched the pearls at my neck, steadying my breath. A calm smile spread across my face. "My dear, did you really believe I would not show up?" The crowd shifted, whispering. David, my son, turned his head sharply, confusion flashing in his eyes, and then, as if on cue, the doors behind me opened once again. The guest I had promised to bring, the one person Jessica feared most, stepped inside. Her face went pale, the color draining away until she looked like a ghost beneath the lace veil. This was the moment she realized her perfect performance was about to collapse. Before we go back to the beginning of this story, let me just say this. Protecting someone you love sometimes requires you to step into the storm. This was my storm, and I had chosen to walk straight into it. My name is Nadine Fletcher, and until 6 months ago, I thought my biggest worry would be finding a dress suitable for my only son's wedding. Life has a way of turning our expectations upside down. My name is Nadine Fletcher. I am 67 years old, and I am not the kind of woman who enjoys making a scene. Yet that afternoon, there I was walking into my son's wedding with my chin lifted and my pearls glinting under the dim golden lights. The church was overflowing with over 300 guests, every pew packed with family, friends, and colleagues who had come to celebrate what was supposed to be the happiest day of my son's life. The air smelled of fresh roses. The music from the string quartet echoed softly against the high ceiling, and all eyes were fixed on the altar. That was when I pushed open the side doors and stepped inside. Jessica Miller, the woman standing at the front of the aisle in her white designer gown, froze when she saw me. Her hands trembled around her bouquet. Her smile faltered as she whispered loud enough for the first row to hear, "What are you doing here? You were not invited. You are not supposed to be here." I touched the pearls at my neck, steadying my breath. A calm smile spread across my face. "My dear, did you really believe I would not show up?" The crowd shifted, whispering. David, my son, turned his head sharply, confusion flashing in his eyes. And then, as if on cue, the doors behind me opened once again. The guest I had promised to bring, the one person Jessica feared most, stepped inside. Her face went pale, the color draining away until she looked like a ghost beneath the lace veil. This was the moment she realized her perfect performance was about to collapse. Before we go back to the beginning of this story, let me just say this. Protecting someone you love sometimes requires you to step into the storm. This was my storm, and I had chosen to walk straight into it. My name is Nadine Fletcher, and until 6 months ago, I thought my biggest worry would be finding a dress suitable for my only son's wedding. Life has a way of turning our expectations upside down. My son is David Fletcher. He is 34, quiet and thoughtful, the kind of man who has always preferred solving complex problems over making small talk. David became even more reserved after his father, my husband Richard, passed away 3 years ago. Losing Richard left an empty space in our family, a silence that lingered in every corner of our home. When David first introduced me to Jessica Miller, I saw something in his eyes I had not seen in years. Light. His smile was easier, his voice brighter, and for the first time since his father's death, he seemed alive again.
Jessica painted a picture of a wedding that seemed to have come straight out of a fairy tale. She spoke of a prestigious venue with sprawling gardens, of imported white roses, of a designer gown that would make her look like royalty. She described it all with wide eyes and breathless wonder, as if even she could hardly believe it. Every time she spoke of her dream wedding, she looked at me with those innocent eyes and whispered, "Mrs. Fletcher, you are like the mother I never had. Do you know what that does to a woman's heart?" It unlocked every protective instinct I carried inside me. I wanted to make her happy. I wanted to give my son the life he thought he had found. So I opened not only my heart, but also my bank account. I wrote checks that I should have thought twice about. I pulled from my savings, from my late husband's insurance policy, and even took out a loan against my home. Every time I hesitated, Jessica hugged me tightly and said, "I promise to give you the grandchildren you've always dreamed of." The bills piled higher than I had ever imagined. $15,000 just to reserve the venue, $12,000 for the Vera Wang gown Jessica insisted on, 2,000 roses imported from Ecuador to line the church aisle and reception hall. Every detail cost more than the last, and yet I kept signing checks. Jessica knew exactly when to cry, when to laugh, and when to lean into me as if I were her anchor in the storm. I mistook her rehearsed perfection for sincerity. I told myself, this is what it feels like when love enters your family. Friends congratulated me. They said I was lucky to be gaining such a kind and beautiful daughter-in-law. I smiled and nodded, but deep inside, something never settled. There was a voice whispering that it was too much, too soon, too perfect. But I ignored it. Because sometimes when you want to believe in a dream, you convince yourself that the cracks you see are nothing more than shadows. And that is exactly what I did. I chose to see only what Jessica wanted me to see. At first, the cracks were small, the kind of details most people would overlook. But I had lived long enough to know that even tiny cracks can split a foundation wide open if you ignore them. One evening, as I was washing the dishes after dinner, I noticed Jessica slipping several folded bills into her purse. I asked lightly, "Don't you ever use a credit card?" She laughed it off, saying, "Oh, I'm old-fashioned. I like to pay with cash." It sounded harmless enough, but the explanation didn't sit right with me. In today's world, who avoids cards completely? Then there were her stories. She told David she had grown up on a farm in Iowa, where she learned the value of hard work. But weeks later, she told a friend at dinner that she was raised by her grandparents in Chicago. The details shifted, subtle but noticeable, like a play script that had been revised one too many times. I tried to share my concerns with David. Sitting across from him one evening, I asked gently, "Doesn't it strike you as strange that Jessica doesn't have a single photo of her family? Not even an old yearbook or a picture with friends?" He sighed, his shoulders tense. "Mom, we've talked about this. Her family cut her off. It's painful for her. Why can't you just accept that?" His words stung more than I expected. I had always been his confidant, the person he trusted above all else. Now my questions made me the enemy. I told myself to stay quiet, to let him have his happiness, even if something in my gut twisted every time Jessica smiled too sweetly. Still, the doubts grew. Her circle of friends was non-existent. She never invited anyone from her past to our home. Her phone rang often, but she always stepped outside to take calls. Each time she returned, her expression was carefully reset, like an actress stepping back onto the stage. The night before her bridal shower, I watched her in the living room, laughing with David as they planned the seating chart. He looked at her as if she were the sun itself, and for a fleeting moment, I envied his certainty. I wished I could believe as he did. But beneath that laughter, beneath the glowing plans for a grand wedding, I sensed a story unraveling. And deep down I knew, whether David wanted to hear it or not, that something about Jessica Miller simply did not add up. The moment of truth arrived when I least expected it. One Thursday afternoon, I drove to David's apartment to drop off a box of personalized favors for the wedding guest. I had a spare key, and I thought it might be a sweet surprise to leave them on the table before he came home from work. The apartment was quiet when I stepped inside. I set the box down carefully, but as I turned toward the hallway, I froze. Jessica's voice drifted out from the bedroom. Only it wasn't the gentle, honeyed voice I knew. This voice was sharp, impatient, almost cruel. "Marcus, I told you not to call this number," she snapped. "No, the wedding is still on schedule. Yes, I'll have access to the accounts once we're married." I stood there, my heart pounding so hard I could hear the rush of blood in my ears. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath so she wouldn't hear me. "How much more do you want? We agreed on 30%. She paused, listening. "The old lady has already given us over 40,000, and she'll hand over more after the honeymoon." The old lady. That was me. My knees weakened, and I had to brace against the wall to keep from sliding to the floor. "This fool is worth at least 200,000, she continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "No, he suspects nothing. He's completely hooked." The words sliced through me like a blade. My son, my precious boy, was a fool in her eyes, nothing more than a bank account she intended to drain. Somehow, I managed to slip quietly out of the apartment without being noticed. Once inside my car, parked 3 blocks away, the shock finally broke loose. My chest heaved as sobs poured out of me. I pounded the steering wheel with my fists, furious at myself for not seeing it sooner. All the little inconsistencies came crashing back in a tidal wave. The shifting childhood stories, the cash payments, the absence of family, the perfect rehearsed tears. It had all been a performance, and I had fallen for it. Worse, I had helped fund it. But as the tears dried, something inside me shifted. The grief and shame hardened into resolve. I had faced storms before. Richard's illness, the years of raising David alone, and I had survived. I would survive this too.
That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my phone in hand. I searched for private investigators in our area. If Jessica thought she could destroy my son and walk away with our family's savings, she had chosen the wrong family. The next morning, I met with Patricia Harris, a former detective turned private investigator. She was sharp, seasoned, and had eyes that seemed to look straight through a person. After I told her everything, she leaned back in her chair and said, "What you are describing is a textbook romance fraud. These people study their targets, learn exactly what you want to hear, and become that person." My stomach turned as she spoke, but her words also gave me clarity. I slid a check across the table. How long will it take to find out who she really is? Patricia tucked the check into her folder. For someone careless enough to use her real voice on the phone? Not long. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The mask was about to come off, and Jessica Miller was going to be exposed. The following days were some of the longest of my life. I waited for Patricia's call, every hour dragging by as I tried to act normal around David and Jessica. She continued to visit me with lists of new wedding expenses, her arms full of bridal magazines, and her lips whispering, "Thank you, Mom." Every time I signed another check, each word now made my skin crawl. Finally, Patricia called. Her voice was calm but firm. "Nadine, you might want to sit down. Jessica Miller doesn't exist. The woman your son is about to marry is actually Sophie Collins, 29 years old, originally from Texas. She has been arrested 3 times for fraud. Only one conviction stuck, but she has left a trail of broken lives behind her." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to keep from collapsing. Sophie Collins. The name alone felt poisonous. Patricia continued. "She works with partners, usually men. The one you overheard on the phone, Marcus Reed, has been her most frequent accomplice. They were romantically involved until she scammed him for $15,000 and vanished. He has been trying to find her ever since." The pieces of the puzzle snapped into place. Sophie wasn't just manipulating David, she was a professional predator. She had perfected the role of the sweet, abandoned daughter, the devoted fiancée, the volunteer with the heart of gold, and I had funded her charade down to the last rose petal.
That night, as I sat alone in my living room, I made my decision. This was not going to be a quiet confrontation behind closed doors. David loved her too deeply, believed her too completely. He would never accept the truth unless it was undeniable, unless it unfolded in front of every single person he respected. I called Patricia again and asked her to find Marcus Reed. If anyone had reason to want Sophie exposed, it was him. Within a day, Patricia sent me his number. He was living in another state, working in construction, still nursing the wounds Sophie had left behind. When I finally reached Marcus on the phone, his voice was rough and cautious. But the moment I told him Sophie was about to marry my son, he went silent. Then he said, "Tell me when and where." We spent nearly half an hour planning. Marcus would drive in on the wedding day. I would signal him at the right moment. Together, we would end Sophie's performance once and for all. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't in months. A calm, cold clarity. Sophie thought she was playing all of us, but this time the game would end with her mask torn away in front of the entire world. The morning of the wedding arrived, gray and heavy with rain. Some called it romantic weather. I called it a fitting omen. I woke at 5, too restless to sleep, and slipped into a simple black dress. I fastened the pearls around my neck, the same heirlooms Sophie had begged to borrow for the ceremony. They had been passed down for 4 generations in my family, and today they would serve as my armor. By 1 o'clock, I was parked 2 blocks away from the venue. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "I'm here, waiting on your signal." Inside the church, chaos brewed just beneath the polished surface. I overheard staff whispering about missing payments. Every vendor had been redirected to Sophie's family, a number that rang endlessly without answer. I smiled to myself, remembering the calls I had made to divert the bills. The game had begun.
At 2 sharp, the music started. David walked down the side aisle to stand at the altar, looking devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. His face glowed with hope, with love. My heart ached for what was about to come. Then the doors opened, and Jessica, Sophie, appeared. She floated down the aisle in her $12,000 Vera Wang gown, holding a bouquet of imported roses, the pearls of my grandmother gleaming at her throat.
Guests sighed with admiration. David's eyes welled with tears. I slipped my phone from my purse and typed one word to Marcus. Now. The side doors burst open with a sharp crack. Gasps swept through the chapel. As Marcus Reed strode in, rain still clinging to his suit, his face was set. His voice thundered through the vaulted ceiling. "Sophie Collins, did you really think you could hide forever?" The bouquet tumbled from her hands. Murmurs rippled through the pews. David stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between Sophie and the stranger. "You've got the wrong person," he insisted. "This is Jessica Miller." Marcus gave a bitter laugh. "Jessica is just her latest mask. Her real name is Sophie Collins, and she's a professional con artist. I should know. I was her partner until she stole $15,000 from me and vanished." Sophie's voice cracked as she shouted, "He's lying. I don't know this man." She tried to sound sweet, tried to summon that same innocence, but the sharp edge of panic betrayed her. Marcus opened a folder he carried and held up photographs. Here she is in Acapulco running a credit card scam. Here in Chicago, pretending to be a cancer patient collecting donations. And here in Tijuana, leaving our hotel room with my wallet, my watch, and my engagement ring. The crowd gasped. David's face drained of color. He turned slowly to Sophie, searching for the truth in her eyes. Sophie stammered, "David, please, I love you. People make mistakes, but I've changed." Marcus sneered. "Changed?" He pulled out his phone. "How about a recording from just 3 weeks ago?" The chapel went silent as Sophie's voice filled the space. "The old lady has already given us 40 grand. The son is a mama's fool. I'll clean out their accounts after the wedding." Every guest heard it. Every guest turned towards Sophie with shock and disgust. David's body stiffened. His voice was low, but trembling with rage. You called my mother a fool?" Sophie's tears smeared her perfect makeup. She reached for him, but he pulled away. The guests shifted uncomfortably, phones already raised, recording every second. And then, as if fate had been waiting for this exact moment, the heavy church doors opened again. 2 federal agents stepped inside, badges flashing. "Sophie Collins, you are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy." Gasps turned into a roar of whispers. Sophie struggled, screaming, "This is a mistake. I didn't do anything wrong." But the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, and she was dragged down the aisle in front of everyone she had fooled. David stood frozen at the altar, his dream bride exposed, his future shattered, and I, hidden in the back, finally allowed myself to breathe. The truth was out. The performance was over. The church fell into a heavy silence once Sophie was escorted out. 300 guests remained seated, their eyes darting from one another, unsure whether to stay or quietly slip away. The minister still stood at the altar, clearly at a loss for words. David remained frozen, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a long moment, he stared at the doors where Sophie had been dragged away. Then, slowly, he turned to face the congregation. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Well, this is not how I expected today to go." A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the pews. David drew in a shaky breath and added, "The wedding is obviously canceled, but the reception is already paid for. If anyone wants to stay for dinner, and an open bar, please, you are welcome." The laughter grew louder this time, easing the tension just enough for people to begin talking in hushed tones. Some rose to their feet, stretching, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others pulled out their phones, already sharing what they had witnessed. I stepped forward from the shadows, then making my way down the aisle. David's eyes found mine, and for a moment all I saw was the little boy he had once been, the boy who used to believe I could fix anything. Tears welled in his eyes as I reached him. "I am so sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I should have listened." "You were not foolish," I told him softly. "You were in love, or at least you believed you were. That is never something to be ashamed of." I reached up and gently unclasped the pearls from his tuxedo pocket, the ones I had taken back from Sophie before she was led away. "These belong to our family," I said, holding them tightly in my hand. "And one day, they will belong to the woman who truly deserves them." Later, at the reception hall that had turned into an impromptu gathering, the atmosphere shifted from shock to warmth. Without the pretense of a wedding, guests spoke more openly, sharing laughter, comfort, and even admiration for the way the truth had unfolded. Marcus found me by the dessert table. "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher, for giving me the chance to finally face her." I shook his hand firmly. "No, thank you. I could never have exposed her alone." He smiled faintly. "Most mothers would have begged their sons to walk away. You, on the other hand, played chess while the rest of us were still playing checkers." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a small laugh. Maybe so, but I would call it something simpler. I would call it a mother's love. When I finally returned home that evening, I placed the pearls back into their box and set them gently on my dresser. They had seen more than I ever intended: betrayal, heartbreak, and justice delivered in the most public of ways. As I sat quietly with a cup of tea, I thought about what had happened. Love can blind us, even the most intelligent among us. My son had wanted to believe in a dream, and I had wanted to believe it for him. That desire almost cost us everything. But sometimes protecting the people you love means becoming the villain in their story. For a while, David had seen me as the obstacle, the doubter, even the enemy. Yet in the end, he understood that every step I took came from love. What I learned is simple but powerful. Trust is a gift, and it should never be handed over without care. Appearances can deceive, and words rehearsed too perfectly often hide dangerous truths. To everyone listening, if this story has touched you, please like, share, and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. Remember, real love protects even when it hurts, and sometimes the best weddings are the ones that never happen.